Hey guys, welcome to this brand new tutorial on arrays in Java. I chose Java because it's the language that I do think arrays make the most sense to be in. In Python, you have something like a list, and in C, memory is allocated a bit differently, so it does work different. However, the concepts kind of do remain the same, so if you are watching this video and you code primarily in C and C++, more of the information will be even worthwhile compared to if you code in Python, for example. But even if you do code in Python, the contents of this video will be helpful. So let's get started with the big question. What is an array? Right? Big question, what is an array? Well, an array is essentially a container that stores data, right? Now, data in this situation can have different meanings, right? In Java, you know that there are primitive and non-primitive sources of data, right? And that still remains true in this instance. You have primitive and non-primitive sources of data. Now, what are primitive and non-primitive sources of data? Primitive sources of data, I'm just going to go ahead and make this a long comment. So, primitive sources of data kind of look like ints, longs, shorts, characters, booleans, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go fully in depth into every single one of these variables. I will have another video eventually linked to this one that goes over every single data type variable for the most part and gives you guys a really great understanding of these concepts. If you are watching this video, I'm assuming you're already familiar with these different data types. If you're not, I still think you can understand the concept. You just might have a hard time applying it in your own code without knowing the basics of data types or variables and what they are. But this is still a very beginner-friendly tutorial. Now, in another case, you have non-primitive variables, right? Or I'll say data types. So these would be things like objects and strings. There's obviously a longer list of both of these. I'll try to link something in the description that goes over data types in a better manner, so you can go ahead, click that link, follow it, come back to this video with just the reference sheet. You don't really need to learn these data types. It's more of just like you need to refer to that data sheet to know, okay, hey, I want to store a group of numbers. Now, do those numbers have decimals or do they not have decimals? If they do, you'd use something like a double, and if they don't, you'd use something like an integer, right? So simple things like that are going to be common use cases when you first start out in your programming journey. Now, the difference between primitive and non-primitive data types, and why I kind of wanted to explain it, is they're stored differently in Java arrays, right? So you should think of it like this. You have an array that's a container, right? In this container, you have, say, a grouping, right? So you'll have this one here, this one here, this one here, and this one here. We'll say we have an array of size 4, and all of these things are contained within these curly braces, right? So you have four brackets here within these curly braces, right? And for those of you that are unfamiliar, this index is referred to as index 0, and then the second one is referred to as index 1, and then you have index 2 and index 3, right? And it continues on sequentially. This is important because you're starting at the digit 0. You're not starting at the digit 1. So when you're using it and you're trying to call exactly what values within this first digit, right, you would reference 0. You wouldn't reference the number 1. Now, I put 0, 1, 2, and 3. these are the indexes. I didn't actually choose to have them inside of this array for this example. I'm just trying to show you what an array can look like, at least in my text editor here. But again, there are various different things that you can store within an array. You can store things like strings, which are full-blown sentences, whatever you like. You can store objects, which are actually can be numbers and strings. Strings are an object in a sense. And this is where you use Java's object-oriented programming scenario. And essentially, when you are dealing with primitive integers, these values directly get stored into an array, right? So how to think about it is every individual box within that container, so say, for example, index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, etc., every single one of them have their own memory address. Now, a memory address looks something like this, where these numbers are in hexadecimal form and are bytes, and they refer to a memory location. And every single one of these boxes or index refers to a different memory address. And when you're using primitive data types, so integers, longs, shorts, characters, booleans, doubles, and whatnot, those directly get stored into this memory address. So to put it simply, you have an arrow here pointing with your value. So let's say we're using an integer, and let's say our integer is 9, right? Just a random number there. You're storing the value 9 into the memory address. So let's say you want to put it at index 0, it'll directly go in there, and you'll have 9, right? This is still index 0. I'm just storing a 9 in there as an example. And this is not how you declare anything. I'm just trying to show it conceptually first. Now, the difference between this and, say, like a non-primitive data type memory addressing is that for a non-primitive data type, you're not directly referencing that memory location, right? That memory location is actually referencing something else. It's not containing its own value. It's a value that is strictly referencing something else. So you'll have that same memory address. So let's go ahead and make a new array here, and let's put like letters, right? But you can't actually put letters because it's not directly referencing it. We'll just say 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So the indexes, and let's say 0 is an index that refers to the memory address at 0x1235, right? Now, when you're dealing with a non-primitive data type, so say inside of index 0, inside of this box here, you want to store a string. Now, while code-wise, all you'll need to do is just type in ABC like I did before, theoretically what's happening is index 0 is pointing to this memory address that actually points to that a different memory allocation that contains the string that you want to go ahead and address, right? So this is called memory referencing, and it's an important topic when you think of it conceptually. So what I kind of want to end this segment with is the fact that primitive and non-primitive sources of data are treated differently, especially in the back end or like behind the scenes in Java. And if you were to go out and like draw things out and kind of understand it that way, it'll look different between the two of them. Now, let's get into the coding part now that you kind of have those concepts down. So you know what an array is. An array is a container that stores different types of information. You have primitive and non-primitive data types, which are your information that you're normally going to be storing within these arrays. Now let's start with step 1. So what is step 1? Step 1 is the declaration of the array, right? It's the declaration of the array. What is a declaration of the array? Well, it starts very simply. You have two methods to declare an array, right? In method 1, you can simply write it as int, and then, so for those of you guys that are unaware again, int is a primitive data type, and we place it first, right? So you have it declared here. So this means that we want our array to be a set of integers. If you want it to be a set of doubles, you'd write double, and same thing with short, boolean, and so on and so forth. You can see a change in color because my IDE is recognizing those words as dictionary words within it, right? So you can't actually say make a variable with these words because they're banned. It's bad syntax, and you'll get in trouble down the line, especially if you're trying to work professionally. So we're going to go ahead and start off with int array. Again, you cannot write array. You can, but it's looked down upon because it is a word that is normally reserved. You have reserved words, which is the word that I was looking for, reserved. When a word is reserved, you can't be using it as a variable type. So instead we use something like ARR, right? And then to recognize it as an array, you just add these brackets here, these square brackets, and you just put a semicolon at the end like you would in any other situation for Java. And now method 2 is to have and the more popular method is to have the brackets in front of the variable. So you can also write it like this. Both of these do the exact same thing, and it's called the declaration of the array. What this does is it just sets up you with the array, or sets you up with the array, but you have yet to actually put it in action. Now to put it in action, you need to initialize it, right? So step 2 is going to be the initialization. I spelled that wrong. Of the array, right? So it's going to be the initialization of the array. Now, in order to do this, you can do a few things. You can do it all in one line, so you can declare and initialize all in one line. I'm going to separate it first, and then I'm going to show you how to do it all in one line. I do think it's cleaner to do it in 2 lines. It doesn't really add too much, but if you are trying to reduce that structure and make things smaller and more compact, you can totally do it in 1 line. But all you need to do is refer back to the array that you created earlier, and you press equals and then new, and then the data type, in this case primitive data type size or int, and then inside of here you're going to want to put the size of your array, right? And then obviously a curly brace in here. So we have size. Now size is going to be that of an integer, right? Again, primitive data type integer. So you can declare it outside, and let's say int size is equal to 4, right? That means that our array here is going to be equal to 4, which means it's going to have the indexes 0, 1, 2, and 3, length of 4. This is an important thing to note because even though it starts at index 0, it's still going to only be length of 4. You're not going to have 5 different indexes when you put 4 as the declaration of the size here. It's still just going to give you 4 brackets, right? And now that you know that, another important thing to know is that while you can change the stuff within your array, so say inside of your array it's an integer array, so we have something like 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So you have something like this. This is your array. So at index 0 you have 1, 2, 3, and then 4 for your third index, right? Say you have that. You can change this to look like something like 2, 3, or 2, 34, 6, not 8, or whatever it is that you'd like. That's fine. There's still only 4 indexes. What you cannot do, so I'm going to write aloud, what you cannot do is increase the size of this array. So if you're going from 1, 2, 3, 4, and you want to go to, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? This here is not allowed. Not allowed. The reason why it's not allowed is because after you initialize the size of an array, you cannot change it. Now, there are things that you can do to kind of get around this, right? One of them being a sorting algorithm. So a sorting algorithm. what is a sorting algorithm, right? A sorting algorithm is an algorithm that you will use to bring all the components inside of one array and transfer it into something else. Now, this is not just restricted to arrays. If you guys know anything about data structures and algorithms, or if you've heard that before, there are different sorting algorithms and you could use them in various different instances. You can use them in things like stacks, you can use them in arrays, you can use them in a bunch of different sorting methods, but and there are faster ones, slower ones, more efficient processes, and inefficient processes. But the way to actually get around this whole I can't increase the size is to make a brand new array of size 5 and then transfer in all of these values using a for loop. Right? So that uses a different concept that I haven't taught yet, which is a for loop. So we won't be really covering that in this video. But in the future, when we do go over for loops, I'll definitely go ahead and throw in an array situation in there. So if you are interested and you're watching this video after that for loop video has been released, go ahead and try to find that on my channel and you'll get a really nice example of that. But today we're just going to focus on arrays. So now that you have it initialized as well as declared, you could actually start working with it. By the way, instead of using this variable, you could also just directly write the number that you want in here. So if you want this to just be of size 5, you can just put it in there, right? You can also make the variable up here, declare the variable, and then use it inside of your initialization. It's totally up to you. It's important that this remains a constant. So normally a constant variable is something that cannot be changed, because once used, this thing cannot be changed, right? It'll kind of ruin your code. You'll get an error and it'll cause problems in your code if this is not treated as a constant variable. So I would just recommend directly putting it in here or creating this as a constant variable in the future. If you don't know what a constant variable is, it's totally fine. It's just kind of a variable that starts at the top of your code. And in Java, you'll see words like static, void, and then you'll have the constant, which will be in like an all caps method. I'm not going to go super in depth into it, but these are probably words that you've never heard of, and hopefully with a few videos of mine, you become more familiar with these concepts. So once you have kind of declared it, let's go ahead and try to find a situation where you can just directly add in all these values, right? You don't need to declare the size of an array. You just need to make sure that you have this line of code. Now, if you want to go ahead and just put in exactly what you want inside of the array in the initialization process, you can, right? So it's called an array literal, and this is basically used in a situation where the size of an array as well as the variables are already known. And then you can use something called an array literal. So if you are making an array, knowing exactly what you want to put inside of it already before, say, after you create it, and then you go through things and you're like, hey, this needs to get put in. No. So this is how you're going to make it. It'll look something like this. So I'm going to show you guys it all in one step. So we're going to do the declaration and initialization in one step. So I'm just going to write one step. And what that's going to look like is this. So we're going to have int, and then remember to put those brackets. It's very important. Equals new int. Now here we're going to leave it in these square brackets. We're not going to write anything in it. Then you're going to go ahead and follow it with some curly braces. Very important, because then in here you're going to put the values that you want. Right? So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is going to be of size 5. And then you put the semicolon. The reason why you don't need to define the size is because Java already knows that this is going to be an array of size 5 because you put 5 values in here, right? These values can be variables. So you can also have like int var equals 1, and you can use var as one of these values, right? It doesn't just need to be strictly integers either. You can have a double, you can have a Boolean. So just make sure that when you do that, you're changing the array that you're using. You cannot in Java store more than one primitive type into the same array. That's an important thing to note. When you are dealing with primitive data types, a data type. You cannot store more than one type into one array. So you can't store a Boolean and an integer data type primitively, all in one thing here, right? All in one array. However, if you were to turn them into a object by using capital letters and making it look like this or like this, you'll be able to go ahead and use them as an object, which is again going to use the same memory referencing tactic, which will allow the array to have multiple different things within it. And that's one of a cool use case of Java. Granted, it's bad practice because you should have everything being of the same sort of element, but you can find ways around it by using things like that structurally. But I'm not going to kind of go in depth into that in this video. We're just going to talk about the basics here. So this is how you do it in one step. Now to change an array element. So say in this array, right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete these top two, or actually I'll leave them there just for the purpose of you guys being able to see this. But say we have this array and we know it kind of looks something like this. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right? So at index 0, you have 1, 1 you have 2, 2 you have 3, 3 you have 4, 4 you have 5. So you want to change this 3 to a 4. Right? So your goal is to change the 3 to a 4. Right? So how would you do that? You simply call the name of your array, so ARR for array, and you state the index. So if we want to change the 3 to a 4, our index here is going to be a 2, right? Because the 1 is at index 0, 2 is at index 1, 3 is at index 2. And then you put 2 inside of the square bracket, right? And all you do is set this equal to 90 or 20, or in this case, a 4, right? So that's how you go ahead and you change a value within the array. Now, in using the exact same method, you can set a variable equal to one of these values, right? So say you want to set, a variable to the value of the first index, right? First index being, let's say 0, right? All you need to do is declare your variable. So say int var, right? Int var is equal to ARR at 0, right? And that works. That is proper notation in order to kind of set this variable equivalent to the integer in the first index of the array. The important thing here is that they are of the same data type. You can see I'm using int for everything. If you're using something like a Boolean or a double, make sure that everything is the same, especially if you're dealing with primitive data types. Now, there are different things that you can do with an array. You can, like I said, while you can't you can't change an array length, you can get an array length, right? So how to get an array's length. So in order to do this, all you need to do is make sure that you're going to use a variable of integer, because this is a value that will always come back as an integer, right? And so say we have int n, and you're going to want to set it equal to ARR for array dot length. And you can do this with any array, right? So if we had a different array named array2, it'll be int n equals array2 dot length. Now what this will give you, right? So in array, let's just use this as the reference. We know we have 5 values in here. So this will essentially return the value 5. And that's because we have 5 indexes. Again, don't mix up the 0 as a 1, right? Like, or as a 0 when you're counting. So say you were to think of this the same way that you do the indexes, you might think 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you might think this would return the value 4, when in reality it returns the value 5. Now the last thing that I'm going to kind of quickly show is an array of objects in Java. Alright guys, so for this part, it is very important that you understand how Java works fundamentally, right? Java is otherwise known as a object-oriented language, right? And that's kind of what makes it such a great language worldwide and why it's so widely used. It has just multiple different areas of usage, and for very complex systems, it is still to this day one of the best languages you can use in your programming life, right? So we're going to cover object arrays, right? I'm not going to cover them super in depth because I think I'm targeting this video to very much beginners. But I do want to kind of put some content out there for people that are a little bit more comfortable with Java and say want to go deeper into it and create some nice programs of their own. So this is for you guys, and if you are a beginner, I am going to structure this knowing that you're watching it. And so I'm going to tell you which parts are important, which parts that kind of relate to what we just did, and how you can kind of learn and keep going with this to figure it out, right? Because programming is consistency. You got to do it all the time, every day, for hours on end before you get to even an intermediate level, right? So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define an object. And to do that, we're going to make a class. And we're going to make a class called worker. And this guy's just going to be an employee for us. In it, we're going to give him two things, or her two things, an age and a name, right? So as you can see, I made these two public variables here. This is the visibility of a variable. You can also have something like public class or private class and private int age. There's also protected int age and protected class. I'm not going to go over visibility in this video, but in a future video, again, when I'm covering all the basics, that is definitely something that is important to go over and something that I will go over. But for now, just ignore that. Focus on the fact that we have int age and string name. Now you know that int is a primitive type and string is a non-primitive type. So this is what makes Java interesting. You're able to have a object-oriented array that allows you to kind of store both of these pieces of information within it, right, at the same time. So in here, we're going to go ahead and make a constructor. This is just something for when somebody is calling this and trying to use this program. You need to have a way to give those variables actual things, right? Like you need to have a way to give it an age and give it a name. And this is how you do it. So you do this dot age equals age, and we have the this dot to kind of distinguish these two because we set them as the same variable, right? And then after this, we're gonna go ahead and make our public main class, just like I was talking about before. If you didn't really understand too much what I've done here, I think the main things to take away are these, right? The fact that we have an object, which is a worker, and inside of that object, we're gonna store two variables, one being a primitive, one being a non-primitive, one being age, and one being the name, right? Just try to think of it like that. The rest of this is obviously important if you're coding it yourself. You could try to replicate it, but I'm not gonna try to break it down and go in depth right now because I haven't taught constructors, and this video is just strictly targeted mainly for beginners and semi intermediate people that might just need a refresher on arrays, right? So we're gonna have public static void main and then string args. And that is something that is going to be used in every single one of your future programs, so remember that, please. And now we're going to go ahead and define our array. So this is us declaring the worker array, right? And all we did is took the class, put the array notation, and made the name of the array, right? Now, just like we did before, we're going to want to initialize it, right? As well as allocating memory, right? And so to do that, all we're going to do is write array is equal to a new worker, and then in here you're going to write 5. And that's just going to be the amount of boxes that we want within this array. So we want 5 indexes within this array, all starting from 0. And I'm going to go ahead and populate 2 of these just so that you guys could see how it works. You're going to want to do array, and then let's use the first index, which again is going to be 0. And you're going to want to write equals new worker, and then bracket the age, and then the name. So this is going to be one of our workers. Let's go ahead and do one more just for the sake of the video. Let's make this one 30, and her name is going to be Diane, right? Simple as that. This is kind of how you make an object array. So an array filled with an object that has different data types within it, and this is going to allow you to kind of do a lot more in your programming life, especially with Java and arrays. And this, I would say, is a lot more commonly used than like the simple array that I've showed you earlier on in this video. But you need to kind of thoroughly understand the concept before working around with this, mismatching with classes and like using a bunch of them together and making a program. And that was kind of the point of this video. I wanted to get across that basic learning curve so that we could get to the point where we're using them a lot more and easier or easily in future videos. Anyways, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Hopefully it wasn't too long. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys all next time.